Culture and aggression. Anthropologists have long noted dramatic cultural variation in the expression of aggression. People in some cultures have been observed to be unusually kind, peaceful, and cooperative. Alaskan Inuits, for example, have been described as rarely expressing anger or aggression, and as remarkably kind in their actions with others. People in other cultures have been portrayed as violent, belligerent, and aggressive. Among the Yanomami, who live in the Amazon region, aggression is encouraged in children. Intra-tribal fighting with spears and knives is a weekly source of injury and death, and rape and war are considered an intrinsic part of human nature. 1997. Cultural differences in aggressive expression. A. The Alaskan Inuits rarely express anger or aggression. B. The Yanomami encourage aggression in their children and are known for their violent raids against their enemies. The Yanomami's fitting name for themselves is the fierce people. These qualitative observations are backed up by quantitative data. There are dramatic cultural variations in every kind of aggression, including bullying, assault, murder, and rape. What accounts for such variation? A cultural perspective holds that certain values, as well as habitual ways of construing the self and others, make members of one culture more aggressive and violent than others. Social psychologists have developed ways of examining cultural differences in aggressive behavior in the laboratory in order to better understand them. The culture of honor. In a culture of honor, which is prevalent in the U.S. South, see Chapter 2, men tend to be more concerned than people in other cultures about their reputation for toughness, machismo, and their willingness and ability to avenge a wrong or insult. These concerns give rise to firm rules of politeness and other ways people recognize the honor of others, thus lending stability to social relationships and reducing the risk of violence. The downside of the concern with honor is that it makes people particularly sensitive to slights and insults, thereby leading them to respond with violence to protect or reestablish their honor. As you'll recall from Chapter 2, Richard Nisbet and Dov Cohen, 1996, have shown that when their honor is slighted, Southerners are more likely than Northerners to respond with aggression. In archival research, Nisbet and his colleagues found that murders in the context of another felony case were about equally common in the North, South, and Southwest, but murders that occurred as a result of an argument or perceived insult were far more common in the South and Southwest than in the North. Figure 13.5. Culture of honor. A culture defined by its members' strong concerns about their own and others' reputations, leading to sensitivity to insults and a willingness to use violence to avenge any perceived wrong. Figure 13.5. Homicide and the culture of honor. Argument-related homicide threats point to a sensitivity to slights and insults that characterizes a culture of honor in the South and Southwest. Okay, so this is a side-by-side bar graph. On the x-axis are the categories of felony-related murders and argument-related murders. On the y-axis is white male homicide offender rates per 100,000 from 0 to 5. And the two sets of bars are non-South and South and Southwest. So you can see that the rates of felony-related murders are similar in different regions of the states, but argument-related murders are much more common in the U.S. South and Southwest than in other regions of the United States. So when you look at felony-related murders, for both the non-South and the South and Southwest, they're about 1 per 100,000. But when you look at argument-related murders, when you look at the non-South, it's about 2 per 100,000 murders that are argument-related. But when you look at the South and Southwest, it's about 5 per 100,000 that are argument-related murders. Wow, so that's almost twice more murders and white male homicide offenders per 100,000 in the South and Southwest due to argument-related murders. To examine participant sensitivity to slights and insults, Cohen and his colleagues exposed Southerners and Northerners to an insult in the context of a laboratory study. An accomplice of the experimenter bumped into the subject and called him an asshole, 1996. Insulted participants from southern states showed more anger in their facial expressions than did insulted northerners. The insulted southerners' testosterone and cortisone levels increased significantly more than those of insulted northerners. Following the insult, the southerner shook another person's hand more firmly and refused to move out of the way of an imposing Confederate walking toward them down a narrow hallway. Additionally, in a later field experiment, Cohen and Nisbet, 1997, found that some Southern employers actually expressed a good deal of warmth toward a potential job applicant who confessed to having been convicted of manslaughter after defending his honor. Where did this regional difference in the importance attached to honor come from? Why is honor-related homicide more common in the South? Could it just be the hot weather? It's not likely because honor-related homicides are actually more common in the relatively cool mountain regions of the South, Kentucky, Arkansas, than in the relatively hot agricultural lowlands, Mississippi, Alabama. Could it be the brutal history of slavery? Again, it's not likely, and for the same geographical reason. Homicide is more common in the highlands, where slavery was relatively uncommon, than in the lowlands, where slavery was ubiquitous. Nisbet and Cohen, 1996, argue that the culture of honor in the South is a variant of a cultural perspective found worldwide among people who earn their living by herding animals. Herders are susceptible to losing their entire wealth in an instant if someone steals their cows, pigs, or sheep. Farmers, in contrast, are susceptible to no such rapid and catastrophic loss, at least not at the hands of another person. The vulnerability of the herder means he has to develop a tough exterior and make it clear he's willing to take a stand against the slightest threat, even an insult or a joke at his expense. This difference fits the pattern of violence in the United States because the North was founded primarily by farmers from England, Germany, and the Netherlands, whereas the South was founded primarily by Scottish and Irish settlers, and especially the Scotch-Irish of Northern Ireland, Celtic peoples who had herded rather than farmed since prehistoric times. Thus, the people in the Southern Highlands, where the herding culture continued to be a major economic activity until quite recently, were more likely to be violent than those in the lowlands, where settlers had taken advantage of the rich soil to become farmers. Culture and sexual violence. In 1990, Nobel Prize-winning economist Amartya Sen estimated that there were 100 million missing women in the world. Women, holding constant their country of origin and class background, are more likely to enjoy a longer life expectancy than men, so a given population should include more women than men. But in some countries, particularly those where women have less status than men, women are underrepresented in the population because of premature death due to patterns of negligence and violence, hence the estimate of missing women. In certain countries, for example, female infanticide is practiced. In addition, in those societies, parents are less likely to immunize their daughters than their sons or to take their daughters to the hospital when they are sick. As a result, girls are more likely to die early deaths due to preventable or curable sicknesses. Bride burning, the practice of punishing a young woman for her family's failure to confer a sufficient dowry on the groom's family in marriage, claims the lives of several thousand young women in India every year. The sexual trafficking of young girls into a lifetime of prostitution, widespread throughout the world, claims the lives of thousands of girls each year, some as young as 8. Some of these girls are sold by their own families. Less deadly forms of sexual violence are common in virtually every country. For example, in the United States, 50 to 80% of women have been sexually harassed, having been stalked, catcalled, or made the target of obscene comments at work or over the phone, 2008. Moreover, approximately 10 to 20% of adolescent and young adult females report having been sexually assaulted by someone they are dating, 2011, and 1 in every 5 women have been raped, 2015. One of the most disturbing and common acts of violence against women is rape, the coercive forcing of sex by one person, usually male, on another, typically female. Rape is often used as an instrument of terror during war, as it was in the genocides in Bosnia, Rwanda, and Darfur, and when ISIS took over large tracts of land in Iraq and Syria. But acts of rape aren't limited to the madness of war. According to the organization UN Women 2011, sexual violence and rape are disturbingly common. A survey of 86 countries found that, on average, about 20% of women experience sexual violence or rape in a romantic relationship at some time in their lives. In some countries, this rarely happens. For example, only 2.7% of women in Cambodia reported such an experience. In other countries, the statistics are staggering. In Ethiopia, 58.6% of women reported experiencing at least one episode of sexual violence in an intimate relationship. Sexual violence has enormous long-term costs. Compared with women who haven't been traumatized by sexual violence, women who have are twice as likely to experience major episodes of depression and are more likely to commit suicide. 2017. Rape is a common method of violence during war. Naomi Thomas, age 16 and pictured here, was raped amidst the violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo. What makes rape more prevalent in certain cultures than in others, and how can such a question be tackled empirically? Peggy Reeves Sanday, 1981-1997, relied on archival records to study the cultural determinants of rape. She read descriptions provided by historians and anthropologists of 156 cultures dating back to 750 BCE and continuing to the 1960s. Looking carefully for references to rape in these accounts, Sanday identified what she called rape-prone cultures, which made up 18% of the cultures studied. In these cultures, men used rape as an act of war against enemy women, as a ritual act, such as part of a wedding ceremony or an adolescent male's rite of passage to adulthood, and as a threat against women to keep them subservient to men. In 35% of the other cultures, rape was present or observed, but not used in such ritualistic and systematic ways as in rape-prone cultures. And we note, sadly, that it would be no surprise if these figures actually underestimated the prevalence of rape-proneness across cultures. They are based largely on anthropologists' observations, and rape is one of the most difficult acts to observe and a taboo subject in many cultures. Rape-prone culture. A culture in which rape tends to be used as an act of war against enemy women, as a ritual act, or as a threat against women to keep them subservient to men. Sexual violence on campus. The continuing prevalence of sexual violence prompted a new federal investigation of 55 American universities and colleges for failing to take appropriate measures in responding to sexual attacks on campus. So you can see it's women picketing their school, holding up signs saying 97% of rapists walk free, believe survivors, football is a privilege, safety is a human right. The Me Too movement. In response to the persistence of sexual harassment in every work context, women organized around the Me Too hashtag, sharing stories and engaging in protests. So you can see a Me Too movement, survivors march, women holding a big sign and walking down a busy roadway. In an urban city. The cultures where rape was particularly prevalent were defined by two qualities. First, rape-prone cultures were more likely to have high levels of violence generally, a history of frequent warfare, and an emphasis on machismo and male toughness. Second, in keeping with the idea that rape is a means of subordinating women, rape was more prevalent in cultures in which women had lower status. Women in rape-prone cultures were found to be less likely than in other cultures to receive education and participate in political decision-making. Where rape was uncommon, women were more empowered and more likely to be granted equal status with men. Additionally, studies find that with rising economic equality, violence perpetrated by romantic partners against women declines. 2006. Consider the Mabutu Pygmies, who are an indigenous group in the Congo region of Africa, as an illustration of these findings. 1965. The Mabutu Pygmies are a reportedly nearly rape-free society, and there is minimal interpersonal violence and fighting. This culture attaches great prestige to the raising of children and values women's contribution to group well-being. Though women and men assume different duties, they have equal standing, and women and men participate equally in political decision-making. gender equality in a rape-free culture. The Mbuti Pygmies in the Congo region of Africa are known for their low levels of violence against women. Looking back, cultures differ greatly in their propensity toward aggression. Members of cultures of honor, which frequently were herding cultures in the past, are more inclined to commit violence when insulted. Cultures that are prone to rape are characteristically those that devalue women and have extreme gender inequality. Evolution and aggression. For many people, the word evolution brings to mind a violent struggle for survival and the opportunity to reproduce. The nature red in tooth and claw, to quote from Tennyson's poem In Memoriam. As we've emphasized at several points in this book, evolutionary theory is more than just a theory of competition and violence. It's helped illuminate all manner of social behaviors, from romantic attraction to empathic concern for others. Nevertheless, just as popular views of evolution would have it, an evolutionary perspective has proved helpful in understanding some of the origins of aggression. Violence in step families. Literature is full of tales of wicked step-parents who abuse their children. In the animal kingdom, step relations seem similarly prone to violence. To take one example, when male lions acquire a new mate, they routinely kill all of that female's cubs from her prior matings. Evolutionary psychologists Margot Wilson and Martin Daly argue that these tendencies in our mammalian relatives have left their trace in human nature. 1980. Natural selection, Daly and Wilson maintain, rewards those parents who devote resources to their own offspring. All the behaviors related to parental care, from filial love to breastfeeding, assist the survival of our own offspring, thereby increasing inclusive fitness, our own survival plus that of children carrying our genes. But parental care is costly. As any parent of a newborn knows, it requires time, effort, and material resources. It's been estimated that hunter-gatherers typically don't become net contributors of food and other resources until around the age of 21. Your parents should be so lucky. In evolutionary terms, parental expenditures are offset by the gains of having offspring, namely the survival of their genes. Step-parents, in contrast, incur the same costs with no enhancement of their inclusive fitness since they don't share genes with their stepchildren. Inclusive fitness. According to evolutionary theory, the fitness of an individual is based on reproductive success and the passing of one's own genes and those of relatives to future generations. Survey results consistently indicate that relationships between step-parents and stepchildren tend to be more distant and conflicted, as well as less committed and satisfying, than between parents and their genetic offspring. 1991. Crime statistics are even more sobering. Daly and Wilson, 1996, found that in the United States, children who are younger than age 2 are 100 times more likely to be abused to the point of death by step-parents than by genetic parents. And in Canada, they are 70 times more likely to be killed by step-parents than by genetic parents. These findings hold, it's important to note, even when controlling for a variety of contributing causes, such as poverty, age of the mother, length of time the couple has lived together, and number of children in the home. In a study of a South American hunter-gatherer people, 43% of children raised by a mother and stepfather died before their 15th birthday. That's more than twice the rate of death, 19%, of children raised by two genetic parents. This statistic doesn't imply that the stepchildren were killed, but at the very least, they were more likely to have been denied resources, such as food and physical care, that were made available to genetic offspring. Mistreated stepchildren. Literature and fairy tales abound with tales of stepchildren treated badly by their stepmothers. A. Cinderella becomes the scullery maid for her stepmother and stepsisters. B. Hansel and Gretel are sent out to die in the forest at the urging of their stepmother. Gender and aggression. When we hear about school shootings or teen violence, or when we read about rape or genocide, it's almost always true that these acts of aggression are committed by young men. Physical aggression is, in fact, from early childhood to old age, among the most marked gender differences in behavior. In the United States, 99% of all people arrested for rape, 88% of those arrested for murder, 92% arrested for robbery, and 87% arrested for aggravated assault are men, 2004. As early as age 2, boys are more physically aggressive than girls, 2009. Men are also overwhelmingly the victims of violence. For example, men are 20 times as likely to kill other men as women are to kill other women, 1998. Women, of course, are also aggressive, but in different ways. Women seem to exceed men in what's known as relational aggression or emotional aggression. They are more likely to gossip, form alliances, and practice exclusion and social rejection to hurt others. Many female readers will remember with a wince the vicious ways girls can behave toward one another in middle school, talking behind people's backs and tarnishing reputations. And with the rise of internet use, it shouldn't be surprising that female adolescents are also more likely to be the target of cyberbullying and the spreading of malicious rumors. 2015. Obviously, this kind of aggression can be extremely harmful. Most striking and well documented, though, is the tendency for men to engage in more physical violence than women. Evolutionary psychologists, including John Archer, have sought to understand these striking gender differences in aggression in terms of access to reproductive opportunities. Their theorizing builds on the concept of parental investment, see Chapter 1. According to this thinking, women invest more in their offspring than men and thus are less likely to desert their offspring and seek other reproductive opportunities. Men, in contrast, are evolutionarily freer to go outside the primary relationship and compete with other men for access to mates. Within this competition, high status, more aggressive men are more successful than low status men in terms of reproductive success or number of offspring. By contrast, reproductively healthy women who want to pass on their genes are, almost without exception, able to do so and therefore don't have the same need to be physically aggressive. Throughout evolutionary history, the basic difference in reproductive opportunities led males to evolve characteristics and strategies for outcompeting other males for mates. Physical aggression is one such strategy, and it accounts for the evolution of that trait, as it serves males well in competing with other males. For example, surveys from cultures around the world reveal that men are 7.6% taller than women, 25% heavier, and 1.5 times physically stronger. Male physical prowess evolved for aggressive encounters with other men, and indeed, today bigger men tend to engage in more aggressive behaviors. 2010. Another advantage of male size and strength is for protecting mates and offspring against animal predators and other humans. According to evolutionary psychologists, nonverbal signs of size and strength evolved in males so they could negotiate their rank in status hierarchies in order to gain privileged access to mates. Cues of physical strength include a broader chin, a deeper voice, which correlates with physical size, and even facial hair, all of which have evolved, the thinking goes, for men to signal strength to other males and enjoy elevated status and preferential access to mating opportunities. The evolutionary approach helps explain the increases in muscle mass, facial hair, and other signs of physical development during puberty in young men. Higher levels of testosterone are associated with higher levels of aggression. For example, juvenile delinquents have higher levels of testosterone than college students. Members of rowdier fraternities also have higher testosterone levels than members of more responsible fraternities. 2000. Social psychologists have also found that testosterone promotes status-related behaviors in competitive settings. Two general patterns of results suggest that testosterone probably served men well in the competition for mates. First, men who have higher levels of testosterone tend to exhibit more dominant, assertive behaviors that presumably help them achieve higher status. In women, the hormone estradiol, which converts to testosterone in the body, has a similar effect. Second, men who care a lot about power and status show increased testosterone. In women, increased estradiol after winning competitions. Some cultural theorists have a very different take on these striking gender differences in aggressive behavior. These theorists believe that men are more aggressive not primarily because of evolutionary patterns, but because men are socialized into roles that encourage physical aggressiveness. Parents, teachers, media sources, and social institutions systematically, but often unwittingly, cultivate more aggressive tendencies in men. Consider, for example, how young boys are treated from the earliest stages of life. When parents see a video of an infant looking startled, the parents are likely to say that the infant is angry if it's a boy. If the same infant is said to be a girl, the parents say that the infant is fearful. 1976. Mothers talk more about emotions with their daughters than with their sons, and such conversations may cultivate greater empathy in women. 1991. The one emotion mothers don't tend to talk more about with their daughters is anger, which mothers are more likely to mention in labeling the emotions of their sons. Thus, starting very early in life, anger and aggressive reactions are made more salient to young boys than to young girls. Given that anger is a primary determinant of aggression, this socialization process might account for at least some of the gender differences we're discussing. Combining the evolutionary and cultural approaches to male aggression, Jennifer Bosson and Joseph Vandello have proposed that a consequence of both evolutionary and socialization processes, a male's gender identity is significantly tied up in his physical strength, toughness, and fierceness. However, according to their precarious manhood hypothesis, many factors, competition, status contests, being the target of male violence, shifting economic conditions, the loss of a job, can render a man's gender identity relatively uncertain. 2013. According to this hypothesis, male gender identity is more vulnerable than women's gender identity, and as a result, men need to resort to risky and often aggressive actions to continually prove their manhood. Empirical studies show that people do indeed believe that manhood is precarious. 2011. For example, in one study, participants read proverbs that portrayed the insecure nature of manhood. Manhood is hard-won and easily lost, or the same proverbs phrased to focus on the uncertain nature of womanhood. Womanhood is hard-won but easily lost. Participants significantly more often endorsed the proverbs portraying precarious manhood. As the precarious manhood hypothesis would have it, men, aware of their more vulnerable gender identity, should be more sensitive to threats to their manhood, and thus more likely to resort to risky and often aggressive behaviors to prove themselves. For some readers, this may be reminiscent of high school bravado, the dangerous acts young men routinely engage in, challenging each other physically, provoking fights, climbing water towers, driving recklessly. We've been told by physicians in the Southwest that the only people who show up in hospitals with rattlesnake bites are inebriated young men. In one study, men first either braided a bunch of ropes or braided the hair of a wig, the latter being a more feminine task and a threat to stereotypical notions of masculinity. 2011. All participants then put on boxing gloves and struck a punching bag. Men who had braided hair hit the bag much harder than those who had braided ropes. These findings suggest a link between precarious manhood and violence against gay people, here too almost exclusively perpetrated by men. In laboratory studies, men whose manhood has been threatened express more distance from gay people and greater aggression toward them. 2011. A scene from the movie Mean Girls. Although men commit most of the acts of physical aggression, women are more likely to engage in relational or emotional aggression. Evolutionary theory and physical appearance. According to evolutionary theorists, someone like Don Draper in the TV series Mad Men could be expected, on the basis of his physical appearance, to have many mates. Precarious manhood hypothesis. The idea that a man's gender identity of strength and toughness may be lost under various conditions and that such a loss can trigger aggressive behavior. Box 13.5. Focus on mental health. The cold-hearted psychopath. Cold-hearted killers are stock figures in violent films. The inspiration for these characters is a clinical category known as antisocial personality disorder, or psychopathy. Psychopaths, usually male, are prone to extreme patterns of violence and make up a significant number of individuals in prison for violent offenses. Hare, 1991. A long-standing assumption is that psychopaths have profound empathy deficits, lacking any feeling for those they harm. Research reveals a more nuanced picture, suggesting that while psychopaths are as adept as the average person in understanding the emotions of others, they have deficits in responding emotionally to the suffering of others. The most systematic study of psychopathy has been conducted by James Blair and his colleagues, 2005. These researchers have found that psychopaths cognitively understand the emotions of others quite well. For example, when shown photos of facial expressions of emotion, psychopaths do as well as appropriate comparison participants in identifying emotions from the face. They also prove to be quite capable at assessing the mental states of other people. They can reliably infer what other people are thinking. They do show empathic deficits in their responses to other sadness, however. Show a photo of a sad face to the average adult, and that person will respond with a galvanic skin response, a measure of the sweat response in the palms that indicates a physiological reaction to the other person's suffering. By contrast, psychopaths show no such physiological response to the sadness of others, but they do show such galvanic skin responses to other emotionally evocative images, such as images of guns. The results of the Blair research indicate that psychopaths understand quite well the emotions and mental states of others, but they lack any feeling for them, most notably their suffering. The psychopath in movies. In No Country for Old Men, Javier Bardem plays the psychopathic hitman Anton Chigurh, whose lack of emotion in causing pain illustrates the finding that psychopaths often respond with little empathy to the suffering of others. Looking back, evolutionary theory predicts that step-parents would be more likely than genetic parents to behave in violent ways toward children, and they are. Males tend to be more aggressive than females, partly because such behavior can help them attain status and gain access to females. Females tend to be more relationally or emotionally aggressive than males. Cultural theorists believe that socialization processes contribute to gender differences in aggression. Recent studies on precarious manhood bring these two lines of theorizing together, helping to explain why threats to the sense of manhood can trigger violence in men.